The quantum resonance chamber hummed with an unnatural silence as Lieutenant Commander Elena Rodriguez watched the Zolarian diplomatic vessel slide into Earth's orbital perimeter. Her fingers danced across holographic controls, a barely perceptible smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Captain Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the communication link. Incoming transmission from the Zolarian lead diplomat. They're requesting standard first contact protocols. Elena's smile widened. Standard protocols. As if anything about this encounter would be standard. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Krulax. The alien's crystalline exoskeleton refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, his four eyes blinking in an asynchronous rhythm that would have unsettled most human observers. But Elena remained perfectly composed. "Greetings, representatives of Earth," Krulax began, his translator rendering his clicks and resonant undertones into crisp English. "The Zolarian Confederacy extends diplomatic recognition to your emerging civilization." Emerging. The word hung in the air like a poorly concealed insult. Captain Chen's response was measured. "We appreciate the Confederacy's interest. Earth looks forward to meaningful dialogue." Elena watched the subtle micro-expressions of the Zolarian delegation. Their body language betrayed a mix of condescension and barely contained curiosity. They believe humanity to be a newly discovered species, barely capable of interstellar communication. If only they knew. A junior diplomatic officer, Lieutenant Area Nakamura, stepped forward with a carefully prepared data packet. Its contents were meticulously curated, a breadcrumb trail of historical fragments designed to provoke exactly the right kind of confusion. As the initial exchange progressed, Elena observed the Zolarian researchers examining the transmitted data. Their communication tendrils, bioorganic sensory appendages that served as both communication and analysis tools, began to twitch with increasing agitation. Something had caught their attention. "Interesting," muttered Krulax, his translator picking up the subvocalization. "These archaeological markers, they don't conform to our predictive models." The first seed had been planted. Beneath the diplomatic vessel, Earth's orbital defense grid hummed with potential. Hundreds of defense platforms, some centuries old, others far more recent, remained on passive scan. Each was a testament to humanity's true capabilities, carefully masked behind a veneer of emerging technology. In a secured communication channel known only to a select few, Elena sent a single encrypted message, 3 words that would set complex mechanisms into motion. Phase 1 initiated. The junior officer, Lieutenant Nakamura, caught Elena's eye. A nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. To the Zolarians, it would appear as a mundane diplomatic gesture. In reality, it was a signal, a microscopic piece of a plan generations in the making. Krulax continued his diplomatic overture, unaware that every word, every gesture was being analyzed far more deeply than he could imagine. The Zolarian researchers were already pulling apart the transmitted data packet, their advanced computational systems working overtime to understand the anomalies. They would find exactly what Elena wanted them to find. A hidden subsystem in the transmission began its work. Mathematical anomalies emerged, subtle patterns that would catch the attention of any sufficiently advanced civilization. Historical fragments that hinted at something more. Technological markers that defied easy categorization. Commander Rodriguez, Captain Chen's voice carried a note of carefully manufactured uncertainty. The Zolarians seem intrigued by our preliminary data transmission. Elena's response was calm. "Exactly as planned, Captain." The quantum resonance chamber continued its silent hum. Outside, Earth hummed like a blue-green jewel against the vast darkness of space. To the Zolarians, it was just another planetary system, a new civilization to catalog, to potentially absorb into their vast confederacy. They had no idea what was coming. In the depths of various research facilities scattered across the planet, systems began to activate. Archival databases with security protocols, centuries old, started their preparatory sequences. Quantum encrypted messages began to propagate through channels unknown to the Zolarian observers. First contact had begun. But this was far from a simple meeting of two civilizations. This was the opening move of a game centuries in the planning. The Zalarian research vessel Quantum Horizon descended into Earth's archaeological research zone, its crystalline hull refracting the morning sunlight into prismatic patterns. Dr. Kara Vex, lead xenorchaeological researcher, could barely contain her professional excitement and growing professional frustration. What should have been a straightforward analysis of a primitive civilization's archaeological record had become anything but simple. "These cannot be accurate," she muttered, her translation implant converting her native click language into crisp English. Her four manipulative tendrils danced across holographic displays, each projection more perplexing than the last. The artifact lay before them, approximately 30 centimeters long. Its external casing appeared to be some form of advanced ceramic metallic composite that defied current materials science. Carbon dating suggested an age of 47,362 years, far older than any known human technological artifact. But it was the internal components that truly challenged everything Dr. Vex understood about technological development. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched carefully, her posture relaxed but her eyes laser-focused. She had orchestrated this moment with surgical precision. The artifact was real, and it was only the first layer of a much deeper mystery. "Interesting," Rodriguez commented, her voice deliberately casual. "Our initial scan suggested it might be some form of data storage device." Zalarian researcher Sub-Principal Extor approached, his sensory tendrils trembling with barely contained scientific passion. "The computational matrix within this device suggests technological capabilities far beyond what should have been possible for a civilization at this developmental stage." What they didn't know was that the artifact was precisely calibrated to provoke exactly this response. In a secure facility beneath the Atacama Desert, a systems administrator named Michael Chen monitored the interaction. His fingers danced across quantum-encrypted interfaces, watching as carefully prepared data began to unfold. The artifact was a message, not just a technological relic, but a carefully constructed puzzle designed to challenge everything the Zalarians thought they knew about human history. Dr. Vex's primary research assistant, a young Zalarian named Zorak, began running complex analytical sequences. Each scan revealed new layers of complexity. The device contained what appeared to be computational algorithms that suggested an understanding of quantum mechanics millennia ahead of its supposed time. "This defies all our predictive models," Zorak whispered, her translation implant catching the mixture of scientific excitement and professional terror in her voice. Rodriguez allowed herself a slight smile. Exactly as planned. The artifact contained multiple layers of encryption. What the Zalarians were seeing was merely the outermost shell, a carefully constructed narrative designed to raise questions while revealing nothing of true significance. Extor's tendrils began to intertwine, a Zalarian gesture of deep intellectual distress. The computational complexity suggests a civilization with technological capabilities that should be impossible for the time period. Behind the scenes, a complex network of systems began to activate. Each scan of the artifact triggered pre-programmed responses, creating an intricate dance of revealed and concealed information. "We'll need to conduct further analysis," Dr. Vex announced, her professional composure barely masking her increasing confusion. What she didn't realize was that every analysis was another carefully laid trap. The artifact was more than a technological relic. It was a message, a challenge, a deliberate provocation designed to force the Zalarians to question everything they understood about human history and technological development. In the secure facility, Michael Chen allowed himself a momentary smile. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as predicted. The Zalarian researchers continued their analysis, unaware that they were participants in a much larger game. Each scan, each computational sequence was another step in a dance choreographed generations ago. Humanity had been waiting, preparing, planning, and now the first act of a much larger performance was about to begin. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the Zolarian researchers with the calm of a chess master who had already seen 10 moves ahead. This was more than a scientific discovery. This was first contact, on humanity's terms. The quantum decryption lab beneath the Atacama Desert hummed with a silence more profound than any mechanical noise. Dr. Imani Okoro watched the holographic displays with eyes that had seen too much, understood too deeply. "Quantum entanglement sequence initiated," whispered Dr. James Liu, his fingers hovering over interfaces that looked more like living neural networks than traditional computer systems. What the Zolarians didn't understand was that the artifact was simultaneously a key and a lock, a technological Rosetta Stone designed to reveal nothing while suggesting everything. In the high orbital research station Prometheus, Ambassador Krelax received the latest analysis from his research team. His crystalline exoskeleton refracted the station's ambient light, creating prismatic patterns that reflected his internal turbulence. These computational matrices, sub-principal Angster's transmission, crackled with excitement. They suggest a level of technological understanding that predates our earliest computational models by several millennia. What he didn't know was that every transmission was another carefully laid breadcrumb. Deep within the lab, Dr. Okoro activated a quantum isolation chamber. The artifact, now suspended in a field of quantum uncertainty, began to pulse with a frequency that existed between detection and imagination. "Frequency harmonics are stabilizing," Liu muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Quantum decoherence is unexpected." The artifact was changing, not physically, but in ways that defied traditional understanding of matter and information. Each scan, each probing analysis revealed new layers of complexity that seemed to emerge from nowhere. In the Zolarian research vessel Quantum Horizon, Dr. Kara Vex found herself experiencing something remarkably close to human anxiety. Her research team had been working for 72 consecutive planetary cycles, and each new discovery only deepened the mystery. "The computational matrix," she explained to Ambassador Krelax during a secure transmission, "suggests a technological understanding that should be impossible for a civilization at this developmental stage." Unbeknownst to her, that was precisely the point. Michael Chen watched from the shadows of the Atacama facility. Every system, every interface was a carefully constructed narrative. The artifact was performing exactly as designed, a technological siren song that would draw the Zolarians deeper into a mystery of humanity's own creation. "Quantum entanglement breach detected," Liu announced, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and controlled tension. The artifact began to emit a series of coded pulses, not random noise, but a carefully constructed signal that would look like technological artifact to the Zolarian researchers while containing layers of information invisible to their current understanding. Ambassador Krelax felt something akin to professional vertigo. The human artifact challenged everything the Zolarian Confederacy understood about technological development, about the very nature of emerging civilizations. In the quantum isolation chamber, Dr. Okoro watched as the artifact began to generate computational sequences that seemed to emerge from multiple potential states simultaneously. It was less a piece of technology and more a living mathematical problem, a challenge wrapped in a technological enigma. "The quantum decoherence patterns," Liu muttered, "they're not random. They're a message. But a message to whom? And about what?" The Zolarian researchers continued their analysis, unaware that they were participants in a game designed generations ago. Each scan, each transmission, each moment of scientific excitement was another carefully laid trap. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from a secure location, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Phase 3 was proceeding exactly as predicted. The artifact pulsed, a quantum heartbeat that existed between possibility and certainty. Humanity had been waiting, preparing, planning, and now, the next act of a much larger performance was about to begin. The genetic sequencing lab at the Olympus Research Complex looked more like a cathedral of science than a traditional research facility. Dr. Aisha Karim stood before a holographic display that pulsed with the most complex genetic map ever constructed. "This isn't just a genome," she muttered to her lead assistant, Dr. Rafael Santos. "This is a record, a living archive." The DNA sequence before them told a story far more complex than any human, or Zellerian, had ever imagined. Ambassador Krulax received the preliminary genetic analysis report, his crystalline exoskeleton flickering with colors that suggested deep cognitive dissonance. The human genetic structure defied every known model of biological development. Scattered across multiple secure facilities, hidden research teams began to synchronize. This was more than a scientific investigation. This was a carefully orchestrated revelation. Dr. Karim's fingers danced across quantum-encrypted interfaces. Each genetic marker told a story of adaptation, of survival, of something far more profound than simple biological evolution. "Look at these epigenetic markers," she told Santos, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and something deeper. "They're not just adaptive. They're intentional." The genetic sequence suggested multiple points of deliberate intervention. Not random mutations, but calculated modifications that spoke of a species capable of directing its own evolutionary path. In the Zellerian research vessel, Quantum Horizon, Dr. Kara Vex struggled to process the incoming data. The human genetic structure contained adaptive mechanisms that seemed to challenge the very fundamental understanding of biological development. A genetic memory, a living record of survival. Deep within a secured facility beneath the Atacama Desert, a system administrator named Marcus Way watched the global research network. Each transmission, each analysis was another carefully laid piece of a much larger puzzle. The genetic data was a message, a challenge, a deliberate provocation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez reviewed the latest analysis from her secure observation point. Everything was proceeding exactly as predicted. No, exactly as planned. The genetic sequence told a story of multiple civilizational resets, periods of advanced development followed by near-total collapse. But each collapse was not an ending. It was a strategic retreat, a preservation of knowledge. The adaptive markers, Dr. Karim explained to a select group of researchers, suggest that humans don't just survive. We strategically rebuild. Ambassador Krulax felt something unprecedented, professional fear. The human genetic structure suggested a species that could adapt not just to environmental challenges, but to complete civilizational collapse. A species that could preserve its most critical knowledge through biological mechanisms that defied current scientific understanding. Marcus Way activated a series of quantum-encrypted communication protocols. Buried deep within the genetic analysis were layers of information, a code within a code. Dr. Santos noticed something strange about the genetic markers. Certain sequences seemed to activate only under specific computational conditions, as if the genetic structure itself was a form of advanced biological computing system. "It's not just DNA," he whispered. "It's a storage mechanism." The Zellerian researchers continued their analysis, unaware that they were participants in a much larger game. Each scan, each computational sequence was another step in a dance choreographed generations ago. Dr. Karim allowed herself a momentary smile. The first layer of the message was being decoded. Humanity had been waiting, preparing, preserving. The genetic sequence pulsed, a living testament to a species that understood survival as more than simple biological continuation. It was a record, a warning, a challenge. And this was only the beginning. The United Nations diplomatic nexus hung suspended above the Pacific Ocean, a floating marvel of engineering that defied traditional architectural limits. Its crystalline walls shifted and adapted, a living testament to human technological prowess. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the main conference chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that seemed to breathe with living information. Opposite her, Ambassador Krulax and the senior Zellerian delegation looked less like diplomats and more like cornered predators. "You've been analyzing our data for weeks," Rodriguez began, her voice calm and precise. "I believe it's time we had a more comprehensive discussion." The chamber itself was a weapon. Every surface, every molecular structure had been carefully prepared. The Zolarians didn't know it yet, but they were walking into a trap centuries in the making. Krulax's crystalline exoskeleton flickered with colors that suggested deep internal conflict. His 4 eyes moved independently, each processing different layers of information simultaneously. "Your archaeological and genetic records," he responded, "challenge everything our civilization understands about emerging technological species." Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Precisely." With a gesture, she activated the chamber's primary display. Layers of information began to cascade. Archaeological records, genetic sequences, technological fragments that told a story far more complex than any single narrative could contain. The Zolarian delegation watched in growing horror as centuries of carefully concealed human history began to unfold. Buried within the diplomatic facility, a quantum processing network began to activate. Each piece of information was not just a data point, but a strategic release, carefully calibrated to challenge the Zolarian understanding of human potential. Dr. Karavex, standing slightly behind Krulax, felt something approaching professional terror. The human presentation wasn't just revealing information. It was systematically dismantling every assumption the Zolarian Confederacy had made about emerging civilizations. "These technological markers," Rodriguez continued, her voice a weapon of pure intellectual precision, "suggest that humanity has experienced multiple advanced civilizational cycles." The holographic displays showed fragments of lost technologies. Not primitive attempts, but advanced systems that seemed to emerge and then deliberately retreat, each cycle more sophisticated than the last. Krulax's translator struggled to capture the full complexity of the presentation. It was less a diplomatic meeting and more an intellectual assault. "We are not," Rodriguez said with crystal clarity, "an emerging civilization. We are a returning one." The chamber's molecular structure began to subtly shift. The Zolarian delegation didn't realize it, but they were being studied as much as they were studying humanity. Deep within the facility's secured networks, Dr. Imani Okoro and her team watched every microscopic reaction. The confrontation was more than a diplomatic meeting. It was a carefully orchestrated reveal. "Your Confederacy," Rodriguez continued, "operates under the assumption that technological development is linear. We know better." The holographic displays began to show cycles of human civilization. Advanced technologies that emerged, then were deliberately scaled back. Civilizations that rose to incredible heights, then chose strategic retreat. Krulax felt something unprecedented, professional vertigo. The human presentation wasn't just challenging Zolarian understanding. It was systematically destroying every fundamental assumption about technological development, about the nature of intelligent life. "We have been waiting," Rodriguez said, her words hanging in the air like a physical presence, "for the right moment to have this conversation." The chamber pulsed, a living, breathing entity of information and potential. Humanity had not been discovered. Humanity had chosen to be revealed. And this was only the beginning. The Zolarian High Council chamber erupted in chaos. Holographic projections flickered with heated debates, political alliances fracturing in real time. "This is impossible." Chancellor Vornak slammed a crystalline appendage against the Council's central interface. No emerging civilization could possess such complexity. But impossibility was no longer a defense against the evidence. Deep within the Zolarian communications network, encrypted channels began to light up. The human revelation was spreading faster than any official communication could contain. Researchers, diplomats, military strategists, all were reassessing everything they thought they knew about humanity. On Earth, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the cascading political fallout with calculated precision. The Nexus Strategic Command Center buzzed with controlled energy. Quantum communication networks hummed with potential. Colonel Area Nakamura studied the global response maps, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that tracked diplomatic and military movements across multiple star systems. "They're fragmenting exactly as we predicted," she muttered to her second-in-command, Major David Chen. Chen nodded. "Phase 6 is proceeding at 98.7% probability match." What the Zalarians didn't understand was that this confrontation was decades in the making. Humanity hadn't just prepared for first contact. They had choreographed an entire galactic recalibration. In the outer reaches of the solar system, a network of stealth platforms came to subtle alert. Not weapons, not defensive systems, something far more sophisticated. Chancellor Vornak's personal research team continued to analyze the human data packets. Each revelation was more destabilizing than the last. Archaeological records suggested human technological capabilities that predated known galactic civilizations. Genetic studies revealed adaptive mechanisms that challenged fundamental understanding of biological development. "It's not just their technology," Dr. Karavex reported to the High Council, her voice trembling with a mixture of scientific excitement and professional terror. "It's their capacity for strategic preservation." The Zalarian political structure began to fracture along unexpected lines. Some factions saw humanity as an unprecedented threat. Others saw an opportunity for unprecedented collaboration. Ambassador Krelax found himself in an impossible position. The diplomatic protocols he had spent centuries mastering were now completely irrelevant. "We are not dealing with an emerging civilization," he argued before the High Council. "We are dealing with a civilization that has deliberately chosen its moment of revelation." Quantum communication networks across Zalarian space began to light up, not with military preparations, but with an unprecedented wave of academic and scientific curiosity. Colonel Nakamura allowed herself a momentary smile. The second layer of the strategy was unfolding. Deep within secured facilities scattered across Earth, research teams began to activate secondary communication protocols, not just data transmission, but carefully constructed narrative frameworks designed to reshape galactic understanding. "They're trying to understand us," Major Chen observed, "but they have no idea how much we want to be understood." The Zalarian response was a complex tapestry of fear, curiosity, and professional desperation. Entire academic disciplines were being rewritten in real time. Technological assessment models collapsed under the weight of human complexity. Chancellor Vornak's final transmission to the human diplomatic team was a masterpiece of controlled desperation. "We require a comprehensive explanation of your civilization's developmental trajectory." Dr. Rodriguez's response was elegant in its simplicity. "We're just getting started." The galactic power dynamics were shifting, not through military might, not through technological superiority, but through something far more profound. Humanity had not emerged. Humanity had been waiting. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Shared Knowledge Symposium convened in a structure that defied traditional architectural understanding. Suspended between Earth's orbital platforms and the Zalarian diplomatic vessel, it was a testament to humanity's ability to create liminal spaces that challenged perception itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, surrounded by representatives from disciplines that had never before shared a common language, let alone a common understanding. Dr. Zorak, the young Zalarian researcher who had first detected the anomalies in human archaeological data, approached cautiously. Her sensory tendrils moved in patterns that suggested a complex mixture of professional excitement and deep-seated anxiety. "Your cultural adaptive mechanisms," she began, her translation implant rendering her complex communication into precise English. "They're not just biological. They're systemic." Rodriguez smiled. Exactly the question they wanted her to engage with. Holographic displays began to unfold around them. Not just historical records, but living representations of human cultural evolution. Each projection showed not just technological development, but the intricate dance of human societies rising, falling, and reconstructing themselves. The Zalarian observers watched in growing fascination as centuries of human history revealed themselves not as a linear progression, but as a complex ecosystem of knowledge and survival. Dr. Imani Okoro, leading a team of cross-disciplinary researchers, began to explain the core of human cultural resilience. "We don't just survive," she said, her voice cutting through the symposium's ambient noise. "We transform." The displays showed civilizations that had faced complete ecological collapse, technological regression, massive global conflicts. But each time, humanity did not just rebuild. They reimagined. Ambassador Krelax found himself experiencing something unprecedented: professional humility. The symposium was more than an academic exchange. It was a calculated dismantling of galactic assumptions about cultural development, about the nature of intelligence itself. Hidden within the symposium's communication networks, quantum-encrypted channels began to transmit layers of information. Not just data, but carefully constructed narrative frameworks designed to reshape understanding. "Your species," one Zalarian cultural analyst commented, "appears to treat collective knowledge as a living organism." Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. They were asking exactly the right questions. The holographic displays began to show something unprecedented. Not just human achievements, but the spaces between achievements. The periods of apparent regression that were actually strategic retreats, moments of deliberate technological de-escalation that preserved critical knowledge. The Zalarian military strategist approached, his sensory tendrils moving in patterns of deep cognitive dissonance. "You have weaponized adaptation itself," he observed. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Beneath the symposium's carefully managed environment, teams of researchers continued their analysis. Every interaction, every shared piece of information was another layer of a complex strategic reveal. Dr. Zarak discovered something that challenged her entire professional understanding. Human cultural archives weren't just records. They were living systems of knowledge transfer that could hibernate, adapt, transform. "We don't have a single civilization," Dr. Okoro explained. "We have a continuous conversation with ourselves across time." The Zalarian representatives began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Not just the presentation of an emerging civilization, but the deliberate unveiling of a species that had been quietly observing, preparing, waiting. Ambassador Krelax recorded a private transmission to his home systems. "We are not dealing with a civilization," he stated. "We are dealing with a complex adaptive intelligence that has been carefully managing its own revelation." The symposium continued. Each moment another carefully laid piece of a much larger puzzle. Humanity had not been discovered. Humanity had chosen its moment. And the conversation was just beginning. The artifact lay silent in its quantum isolation chamber, pulsing with a frequency that existed between potential and reality. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the final presentation, the ultimate revelation that would reshape galactic understanding forever. The combined research teams from Earth and the Zalarian Confederacy gathered in a space that defied traditional architectural constraints. Suspended between orbital platforms, the conference chamber existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, a fitting metaphor for the moment about to unfold. Ambassador Krelax felt something unprecedented. Not fear, not excitement, something closer to cosmic humility. "What you are about to understand," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the weight of millennia, "is not just humanity's story. It is a narrative of survival that extends far beyond our current understanding." The holographic displays began to shift. Not just images, but living mathematical constructs that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. Dr. Zarak, the young Zalarian researcher who had first detected the anomalies, leaned forward. Her sensory tendrils moved in complex patterns that suggested a complete restructuring of her professional understanding. The presentation revealed a story both terrifying and magnificent. Humanity was not an emerging civilization. Humanity was a custodian. The displays showed fragments of civilizations, not just human, but others. Ancient technological frameworks that had been carefully preserved, studied, protected. Evidence of multiple advanced societies that had risen and fallen across cosmic timescales. "We are not the first," Rodriguez explained. But we might be the most persistent. Hidden within the quantum isolation chamber, the artifact began to pulse with increased intensity. Not a mechanical response, but something closer to a living memory. Ambassador Krulax recorded a transmission that would fundamentally alter Zilarian cosmic understanding. "We are witnessing," he stated, "the deliberate unveiling of a species that has been carefully managing the narrative of intelligent life itself." A holographic displays revealed archaeological sites across multiple star systems, not just human sites, sites of civilizations that had long since vanished, carefully maintained by humanity's hidden networks. Dr. Imani Okoro stepped forward. "We are not conquerors," she said. "We are archivists, preservers, guardians." The Zalarian researchers struggled to process the implications. Humanity had not just survived multiple civilizational collapses, they had deliberately preserved the knowledge of other species. Quantum communication networks across multiple star systems began to activate, not as a military response, not as a diplomatic maneuver, but as a complex information exchange that suggested something far more profound. Colonel Arya Nakamura watched the global response systems. Every interaction, every transmission was another layer of a strategy centuries in the making. The artifact in the quantum isolation chamber began to generate computational sequences that suggested multiple potential histories. Not just human histories, histories of civilizations long forgotten. "We have been waiting," Rodriguez said, her voice a precise instrument of revelation, "for the right moment to have this conversation." The chamber itself seemed to breathe, a living testament to humanity's true nature. The Zalarian High Council would spend generations processing this moment. This was not first contact. This was a fundamental restructuring of cosmic understanding. Humanity had not emerged. Humanity had been waiting. And the universe would never be the same. The artifact pulsed one final time, a quantum heartbeat that existed between memory and potential, a whisper of civilizations yet to come.